All right. Hey, Steve.
How are you?
So that's quite a sad ending, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that the weird thing about this film is it fills in some huge gaps for me, because the biggest gap for me is that period of time when Guy and Susanna were separated almost the entire time. I was touring so much, and then I got into trouble and I was homeless and I was locked up and all that, that's those years, and so I saw Susanna once after she got out of treatment, and I can't remember who she was with. It was at that gig they used to do downtown. That's been called several things over the years. It used to be on the plaza there in front of War Memorial Auditorium and all that stuff. And Peter Rowan, I know this very same day, Peter Rowan's youngest son was born, because I was standing with Candy later in the day when she went into labor, and I had to go find Pete. But I was playing, T-Bone was playing, Rodney was playing. I think she'd come to see Rodney play with him sitting with T-Bone. I think that's why she was there that day. And I talked to her that day, and then I didn't see her again for a while. And by the time I did, they were back together, because I went to jail. And then the next time I saw her there's a little bit of it in the film too, the benefit for, it's a dental charity that, for, indigents that needed dental care that Susanna put together at the Bluebird. That Bluebird Cafe record, that's where that was made. There's a little bit of that. You don't see me in it, but I'm off camera just to the right when that whole bit about Townes, guy selling Townes' house because he wanted to die there. That I think that's from that night. It looks like
it is. It's from that night. Yeah. Yeah. So I can't help but, watching the film, it just brings me back to that time when we all took the bus trip to Santa Fe. Right. What do you remember about that day?
When we got there to Jim McGuire's place, he had printed out a bunch of pictures, some of which I hadn't seen in years. A few I hadn't seen at all, but they all start. This is a hard thing for me to get my head around sometimes. I got to Nashville in November of 1974. Guy and Susanna had been there barely 2 years, not even quite 2 years when I got there and we met. And, it felt to me like they'd been there forever, because my whole Nashville world was McGuire's studio, which was on Wyoming in those days and over in the Nations. And then, Guy and Susanna lived a little bit too far out. We didn't hang out there a lot. They would come down and we hung out at McGuire's. That was the deal. So I missed the period at Lomax's house, where the picture on the cover that I lived in that same house later. I rented that very same house around the time that me and Justin's mother met. But,
wow.
But I missed that period. I missed when they were living just above, Bishop's Pub in that duplex. But I met Guy and Susanna at Bishop's Pub because they did come in to shoot pool from time to time. That was their home. And I think that might have been it. I don't think it actually was a pool hall where the mice were released. I think it was Bishop's. I'm pretty sure, because that's where they played pool. I could be wrong about that. Rodney you should check with Rod about that. But I bet that was Bishop's Pub. But, I remember all those pictures laid out, and how young Guy looked was shocking to me, because I don't ever remember him being young. I was young. He was always venerable. And I think I might have told you this. I developed a theory later that Guy was like Merlin in the Arthurian legends. And at least in the Once and Future King, Merlin was born backwards in time, and he was getting younger. And as time went on, very slowly. And I thought that's maybe what Guy was doing, but none of us would be around to actually witness it. Because he just he was always kind of a curmudgeon. He kind of came that way. And, just to see him in those pictures, and he was 33 years old when I met him. And he looks 33 and not a day over 33, maybe even younger in some of those pictures. And it was just sort of, and I look 12, but it's not, I was actually 19 when I first got there. Most of those pictures, I'm actually 20 and 21. But that's a lot of it. It's just the way time changes all of those things. And I think all of us, the way we remember, and Sky and Susanna together is the other part of it. And that's one reason I think the film, it works so much for it to be in Susanna's voice, is we didn't see them as separate entities. We really didn't. I mean, especially me, Rod, Rodney has a separate relationship with Susanna. I did too. Rodney's is much deeper. Townes's was much deeper. I started touring and I was gone all the time. I got married a lot. So it was so that didn't happen as much. I did get called when she couldn't get up. After Rodney moved to California, I was the one that was on call when Guy quit talking for a while. It'd be like, she literally called me one time when they were still in Mount Joe, said, "Come get me." And I said, "What? Why?" And she said, he hasn't talked. He hasn't talked to me in like 3 days. He hasn't spoken in 3 days. I said, "Well, is he pissed off?" He said, "No, he just doesn't talk. Come get me." And that was it. He wasn't mad at anybody. He was just he was working. That's what the deal was. He was in one of those grooves. And I went and got Susanna, and we went into town and visited people, and we went and saw Carlane, went and saw, we ended up in the Gold Rush. It was,
Tell us about, you told me this story for my book when you were playing in Guy's band and you went to Texas and showed up at the Austin Motel and Susanna.
Oh, well, yeah, the Austin Motel was not what it is today. It was before the hipsters took over that block of South Congress. And both of those motels there were pretty known places that prostitution occurred and the odd drug deal. Townes, basically what happened is Guy's dad, we played Houston first, and old number one was just out, and we played Houston first. And of course that was what it was. And the Allman Brothers were in town, which made it even, like more of not sleeping. And I think we did 2 nights in Houston, and the Almonds were there. And Guy had to go to Rockport because his dad became ill. And so Guy took off by himself to go to Rockport. I was charged with, the youngest person in the band was charged with getting the band to Austin, including Susanna. Meanwhile, Susanna disappeared, and I knew that where she was because she and Dickie Betts were buddies. And so I start tracking down the Allman Brothers and find out where they are. And I find Susanna in Dickie Betts' suite, and it's the biggest hotel room I'd ever seen at that point in my life. And it was me, and I had the band rounded up. I had Champ Hood and Chris Laird, and and I had the van, which sorry about that. Hang on. That's a perfectly good girl, but I'll call her back later.
Sorry, Steve.
No, it's okay. It's one of those things. I should have told her, but I mean, I don't know. It's just one of those deals. She calls when she can. We won't even go into that. But there's, I tracked Susanna down, and we spent a little while ourselves, and I think the hotel was called the White Hall or the White something. It was right, that they were just building that area, like south of downtown, that drag that ran into the park, out of downtown, and all those fancy. I think the White Hall, that rings a bell. It was the White something. It was the first fancy hotel I'd ever been in my life. And so I finally captured Susanna, and we ended up staying there all day. It was after dark when we finally headed for Austin. And the gig wasn't until 2 days later. Jerry, Jeff, and Susan weren't around for whatever reason. So Susanna didn't have there to go. We were not given the hotel rooms. There were no hotel rooms booked for this tour. We were expected to just find places to stay, and the other guys were single, so that was not an issue. I was married and pretty serious about it, and it was nobody figured out where I was going to go. So Susanna and I got there. We dropped Chris off. We dropped Champ off wherever they were going in Austin. And we were exhausted. And she'd been listening to My Wild Eyed Dope Rap, as she put it. That's the night that she told me, we get into the hotel, and Townes recommended the Austin Motel. And we get in there, and he you know, he would do things like that. And he didn't think for 1 minute that it was okay. He just thought it would be funny. Susanna goes in and comes out, I mean, almost instantly. She gets the key, goes into the room and comes out almost instantly. And she doesn't even like take the key back to the office. She leaves it in the door and stomps back out to the van and says, put that back, as I'm dragging a suitcase out. And we got back in and she, went off and on about how the room smelled and blah, blah, blah. I want to go and get into the graphics, but she had a graphic description of the way the room looked and smelled and what she figured was going on there. And we went to another motel that was nicer that we just found on the fly, and we checked in. And then I kept going and talking, and she'd listened to me we smoked a joint, and I went blah, 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 for 15 minutes because I've been driving, and because she wasn't able to drive. And she said, man, you need to get your one-liners down. that was it. So, but it was, that's just the way it was. It was like, you had one of the things that you did if you were part of that group of people is when guy quit talking or guy disappeared, then you had Susanna duty. It was one of those things, and we were all glad to do it.
So you say in the movie that you learned how to write songs from Guy and Townes, but you learned to carry yourself as an artist from Susanna. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it was one of those things. Sometimes I get mad at her when I start talking about this because I don't think that she was necessarily put here to be a songwriter. She was good at it and more commercially successful at it than we were. But that doesn't mean she was better at it than we were. She was really good. But sometimes I think she was slumming when she was writing hillbilly songs, and because she did paint like God, and I wish she had painted more. She painted very little during the time that I knew her, and that almost completely stopped. By the time Guy started becoming semi-successful, and she started identifying herself more as a songwriter and being part of that. And her and Guy were, like I said, this two-headed entity, but she wasn't always right, but she had an attitude about what an artist was and wasn't. She thought incorrectly, in my opinion, that Andy Warhol wasn't. She was drunk one night in the Gold Rush, and she said that's the best thing about living in Nashville rather than living in New York is that we don't have to put up with Andy Warhol. And some of that was a comment on being a painter and a really great technical painter that but I don't think there was a part of her that knew that wasn't really true. And there was a part of her that probably thought maybe she should be in New York instead of in Nashville. And I read it that way then. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't lost on me. I didn't, but she did, there would be things like, there was a Tom T. Hall song that came up one night, and I won't get into, the song or anything, but she was making a decision about whether it was art or not. Because Tom T. is sort of like, his work lies, he's a pre-Bob Dylan songwriter, the last generation of pre-Bob Dylan songwriters. Chris is the first. Newberry had one foot in one world, one in the other. And because he was there before Bob Dylan happened, but he got it when it happened. I'm not sure Tom T. Hall ever did. He wrote great songs, and he was put here to do it. But it was just a discussion about a particular Tom T. Hall song, and it was just actually it was Faster Horses is what it was. And I think, at the time I didn't quite understand it, but then I realized later that what pissed her off about the song is it was about, no, it's about money, and he wrote that song over and over again. He wrote another song called Don't Let Your Music Kill You, which a lot of people think was written for Billy Joe, and it was that thing of we were there doing this at a super high level, and we did it consciously. And Susanna was the one that we were trying to impress her, and it was because Guy was trying to impress her. It was just, she was a great, like really really stringent kind of yardstick about whether you were whether you were doing your job or not.
Was there anything in the film that surprised you, Steve?
I didn't quite understand how much Townes was there, like literally the three of them living together, because my view of that was I got to Houston in 72, about the same time Guy got to Nashville. And I mean, I got to Houston to live in 72. I went first time when I was 14, I ran away from home and went there. And, but it was, I always saw Townes coming back from Colorado or coming back from Nashville in Houston. And for whatever time he was there, and that I'm writing a memoir now, and I'm dealing with that part of my life. And it's like we all just sat around and waited for Townes to come back. And everybody's world that didn't leave Houston, or I left Houston a little, but I never went further than Austin or San Antonio or Dallas. And we just all waited for him to come back, and everybody lived vicariously through him, which was probably not a good thing to do. And it just, so it filled in a lot of what was happening just before I met Guy, the 2 or 3 years before. And I didn't understand, that they really did see themselves as a unit, the three of them.
Right.
And she describes it that way, and I also, I'm on more of those tape recordings than I realized I was. That was another thing I was being recorded a lot more than I thought I was. I saw my name go by a couple of times.
Yeah, Susanna liked to just take out the recorder and set it on the table whenever you all were together.
Yeah, no, she did it a lot. And I had no idea for a long time. I knew, she told me years later that, and I just never wasn't, there was, cassettes were new. They were a relatively new thing. We didn't even use them for pitching songs. We were still pitching songs on reel-to-reel tape.
Wow.
So, cassettes were a brand new thing. She was, I made my first demo to take around to publishing companies at their house on a 1/4 inch. They had one at the house, but that cassette recorder of hers, that was like new technology. That was cutting edge shit. And so you'd notice one when one came out.
Right. Right.
And they weren't super high sound quality. There was a thing that happened later with the Ghetto Blasters, the next generation of cassette recorders, but that's not what that was. It was the little, Panasonic, cassette recorder that was expensive. There was street by, and a point that some nerds know this and some don't, that Street Fighting Man, that what a lot of people think is an electric guitar on the Rolling Stones recording of Street Fighting Man is actually an acoustic guitar recorded through a cassette recorder like that, overdriven and then transferred from that with a microphone over to the tape. That's what, and that was because they'd gotten the very first cassette recorder in London.
Wow.
That's what they did.
Wow.
That was in 69 or something, so.
Well, when Guy gave me those tapes, he gave me just 2 days after Susanna died, he gave me her written diaries and those tapes. And the written diaries, I did go through and use some of that in my book, but I didn't want to tackle those tapes. And then when we started working on the film, and Paul and I would sit down after supper every night and listen to the tapes as he digitized them. And I was just blown away by the gold that was in those tapes. And also really surprised that Guy gave them to me.
You know what? It doesn't surprise me. As private as he was, he trusted you. And that was I knew that for a fact. So it doesn't surprise me that he gave them to you at all. The deal with Susanna, the last conversation that Guy and I had about Susanna was at Hardly Strictly. And I hadn't seen her in a while. And I had no idea what was going on with her, really. And I saw Guy only at Hardly Strictly every year. And for a long time, we did a guitar pull thing that I hosted, and Guy was on after he got where, Sherry didn't really want to put him through a whole set, and we wanted to keep him on the roster. So we started doing a guitar pull, basically to whitewash the fence a little bit for Guy. Guy was famous for whitewashing the fence anyway, because he hated places where he couldn't smoke. So that place, what was that place downtown Nashville? Cafe something, but Milano. He was playing there one night. I walked through the back door, and he had just taking somebody off stage, and he saw me in the back and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Earle." And he handed me his guitar, and he went out back. He said, I need another cigarette. And he would whitewash the fence. He'd get you to play half of his gig for him. But it was just that, I don't know. There's that I just asked him what was going on. And, we went through a period where right after I got clean, where that's the only place I saw him. I did not go to the house. And the reason I didn't go is because he always tried to get me to smoke a joint or take a drink or do something.
Right.
He had utter contempt for recovery, until not too long before he died. And then he basically eventually when he figured out I wasn't going to come and that I wasn't going to pick up, then he eventually sent word through other people that he wouldn't do that anymore if I came back. And so I came back. And so the last 7 or 8 years I saw him every time I came to town. But I just said, well, how's Susanna? He said, not worth the shit, just wants to lay in bed and take pain pills all day. And I had no idea that was going on. I mean, I was there, the story that Rodney tells about the Townes tribute, because that's when he picked up on it. And, I don't know. I saw Susanna out a few times after that. I saw, we did that, and we did, I saw her, the Bluebird thing right after I got out of jail. That was literally my first year. That's September 13th, 1995. I had a year clean that day.
Wow.
And, the day we taped that, and then I saw her at something at Emmys, at some point, and I saw her when Townes died, and I think, and that's what's weird about it. I think the last time that I actually saw Susanna was the wake at Guy and Susanna's house, and then to hear Rodney say that she went to bed that day, then it makes perfect sense to me, because I don't think I actually saw her in the flesh after that day.
Wow. Yeah, when I met Susanna, I met her in 2000, so it was 3 years after Townes died, and I saw her in all the years I knew her. I saw her in street clothes once. Most of the time she was in her pajamas in bed. But I did enjoy sitting next to her in the bedroom, and she told me great stories, and, I'm glad I had that time with her, but I did not know the Susanna that you and Rodney knew. I never knew that Susanna.
Yeah, well, she was, it was an amazing thing. It made you feel a little weird, and like I said, you used it in the film. The relationship with Townes was a little uncomfortable to be around. And it wasn't that there was anything going on. It was just that there was something going on. It was obvious. It was different. And Guy knew it. But he also knew that Townes was hauling a lot of water for him. They got right down to it. And I really do believe that he, and I said it, in the movie that part of the reason he got to keep her was because he was willing to let other people, do that, talk, because he wouldn't. But with Townes, they really were, we used to have those, Jerry Jeff's birthday just blew by, and Susanna's birthday just blew by, and Townes, there was a big Pisces party, the whole, basically this time of year. And from the time I got to Nashville, I met Townes. I mean, the first time I was in the same room with Townes was Jerry Jeff Walker's 33rd birthday. I crashed it. I wasn't even invited. And I overheard John Inman telling Gary Nunn where the party was. And I lied to this girl that had picked me up hitchhiking, and told her we were invited. And I went in, and about halfway through the party, I'm just trying to make sure nobody figures out I'm not supposed to be there. And here came Townes through the door, and it's like, it's how my book opens. And it's just,
I'm so glad you're writing that book.
I got to finish the fucking thing before it kills me. But it's like, a memoir is like, my novel was like hard enough work, but it was like, I didn't know that my cross-dressing ex-football star prostitute was going to shoot my priest until the night before it happened. This is all shit that I know. And so sometimes it's really hard to make myself get in the chair and work on it every day. So it's become a book about recovery. And then, you know, I was going on it pretty good last summer, and then Justin died, and that changes this book, you know. So I've had to put it down and back up, and now I'm back to work on it again with you know, keeping that in mind. But Susanna's in it, Townes is in it, Guy's in it. Not all my wives are in it, but all those people are.
Well, Steve, thank you for having this little after party with me on Zoom.
Yeah, I've done a lot of stuff on Zoom I didn't think were possible electronically in the last year or so. It's a great thing. I guess we all wish we'd bought stock in Zoom when it gets right down to it.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize how much I missed playing for people. And it was Guy Clark that told me songs aren't finished until you play them for people. And I'm going to get to do that. I'm doing, Emmy and I are going to do a show at the winery, you know. Well, actually it's, you know, that, and I've got 3 shows at the City Winery in New York coming up. And the plan is to tour with the band this summer, later in the summer. Who knows whether that's going to happen, but we're going to plan for it. And eventually we'll get back out there. But I miss playing for people. And that's, I didn't realize how much until I didn't do it for the longest period in my life.
Well, I miss being in the audience, and I look forward to being in the audience at one of your shows this summer, hopefully. Yeah,
me too. I hope to see you there. Okay. But you should be very, very, very proud of this film. It's really, it turned out as good as it could have turned out, in my opinion.
Oh, thanks, Steve. All right, well, I love you. I miss you.
Love you. Bye.
And I'll talk to you soon. Bye.